All right. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing at UBC. So I'm going to talk to you about mapping out a new journey for our students through the educational system and through every educational encounter that we have with students. This is an aerial view of our campus. You can see it's beautifully located on a peninsula that sticks out into the Pacific Ocean. And in the front of the image, you can see sort of the delta of the Fraser River, and then to the north there is the inlet. That's one way of looking at campus, and it's kind of that aerial view. There are other ways to look at campus. So these are some pictures of campus. In the middle, of course, is the map of campus that I consult regularly when I have a meeting in a building I've never been to. There's my building where my office is. There are the iconic UBC letters that all graduates like to take pictures in front of with their parents. And there's the reconciliation pole, which reminds us of our history of colonization, which reminds us that our campus is on the unceded territory of the Musqueam Nation. And it reminds us of our history of the residential school system in Canada. All of these are significant parts of the UBC identity, and all of them are a way of looking at our campus. But I'm going to take you away from the west coast of Canada, and I'm going to take you into the middle of Europe, and I'm going to tell you a story of a hike that I did. So I started in this small little village close to the border to Luxembourg, and I wanted to go on a long hike. It was almost 20 years ago. I'd gone through a terrible breakup and I needed to clear my head. And in this old house, I found a hiking map from the 1960s, and I thought, I'm going to be just fine, because things don't change that much, right? Well, it turns out a hiking map from the 1960s is not the way to go, and I got terribly lost. So here I was, and it was before smartphones, before cell phones, and I was walking, basically relying on the sun and this hiking map from the 60s, which was very useless, and I got lost in these dark forests. When I finally made it to my destination in Luxembourg, I was very relieved, very tired. I could hardly walk anymore. I'd been walking for about 8 hours. If I had had modern technology, I would have, before I started, pulled up Google Maps, and it would have shown me exactly how I had to walk, and it would have shown me it would take me just under 6 hours to get to where I wanted to go, and I probably would have never done the hike, because I thought it's going to be 4 hours, I'll be fine. 6 hours might have been just a little bit much. In addition, I would have had my smartphone with me, so every time I was unsure of where I was and which turn I needed to take, I could have just checked, right? And so with this explosion of technology, we now have the opportunity to be a lot more secure in what we're trying to do, and we can, map our way much, much better. And so my question is, in our educational system, are we providing our students with the equivalent of a map from the 1960s, or are we leveraging the technology that everybody has in their pocket to really help them through our courses? So the question is, how can we provide the best maps for our students' educational journeys? And there are so many tools that we have. Technology, media, books. Books are still a technology that is valid. Lectures, online stuff, digital everything, AR, VR, 360 video, the list goes on, and the list will expand as we are in an exponential growth phase of these technologies right now. This was one of the most disruptive technologies, the printing press. In the 15th century, this changed everything. But it wasn't the printing press that changed the world. It was the content that was printed on the printing press. And it was the explosion of books that we had. So I love this graph here, which I think I picked off Wikipedia. In the 15th century, there were hardly any books circulating in Western Europe. And by the 18th century, we had 10 billion books circulating in Western Europe alone. An absolute explosion of knowledge and distribution of knowledge. And in fact, before the printing press in the Middle Ages, you had to travel to preeminent universities where scholars were and where there were libraries with handwritten manuscripts. And you listened to a scholar reading from these books. This is a university now, and it looks exactly the same. We still come together in large auditoriums, and we listen to somebody read not out of a book, but they typically read off their PowerPoint. And the question is, why are we still doing this? I think there's real value to coming together as we are here now and sharing information. And there's real value in lectures. But what we do in lectures, I think, may need to change. And we can leverage the technologies to make these human encounters much more valuable. We have evolved as a society, we have evolved as humankind, as a society of storytellers. And we share our knowledge with each other through these encounters and through the stories that we share. And I think education has a lot to do with sharing stories and with sharing experiences. This is Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian media philosopher, and he said, "Anyone who tries to make a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either." He doesn't just link education and entertainment. He calls you a fool if you don't agree with that. And I think he's also saying that stories matter and the way we deliver them matters. And I'm going to give you an example here. So this is Huckleberry Finn, one of the greatest American novels. It's written in a complicated language, a language that was typical for the era it was written in. If I try to read this book to my 5-year-old, she's not going to be impressed. She's going to get disengaged after about 2 pages. She's not going to want to continue listening. She's going to walk away. There might be tears. She's going to be put off Huckleberry Finn for the next 10 years, and that would be really unfortunate because there are many topics that I want to share even with my youngest daughter. So there's this company called Cozy Classics, and what they do is they take big novels from world literature and they transform them into children's books with these little felted figures. I'll give you a look at what it looks like in there. So you've got the two talking there. So all of a sudden, with just one word per page and a picture, you can engage the youngest readers and tell them about a story about friendship, about adventure, about the meaning of freedom, and that slavery is not a good idea. And so all of a sudden you can have a meaningful conversation about these very deep human truths without having to go into the complicated language of Mark Twain. So really, when you're looking at communicating something, you have to look at the context of your audience. The context of Mark Twain's audience was very clear. He was writing this book in a societal context where he wanted to make clear that racism is stupid and that slavery is abhorrent. If I read this to my 5-year-old, I need to make sure that I can bring those same concepts across in a way that is accessible to her. So we're constantly having to adjust what we're saying to the audience that we have. Now, when I teach my medical students, I don't think they're at the Cozy Classics level, but I think it's somewhere in between, and it really depends on what I'm trying to explain to them. I cannot speak to a first-year student at an expert level. I need to engage them at a level where they can understand and then build on that. This here is my neuroscience crush, Eric Kandel. And I love this quote of his, which is out of his book, where he writes about science and art. Science seeks to understand the complex processes by reducing them to their essential actions and studying the interplay of those actions. And this reductionist approach extends to art as well. And I think he's absolutely right. And I think this reductionist approach applies to education as well. I think we need to take the complex and reduce it to its essential components in order to be effective communicators and effective educators. This is a picture of a pyramidal neuron drawn by Santiago Ramón y Cajal. And I think it's a little bit the Vitruvius Man of pyramidal neurons. And just like this Leonardo da Vinci depiction of the Vitruvius Man is not the portrait of a specific person, but it is the perfect depiction of the human form. And that is the perfect depiction of a pyramidal neuron. It's not one single neuron that he drew there. Rather, he looked at many and many pyramidal neurons to synthesize the essence of what it means to be a pyramidal neuron and drew that to communicate what the cellular structure of the brain looks like. This here is Santiago Ramón y Cajal in his lab in Spain, and there are some more drawings of his that he did. I want to really focus in on the one on the right there, and that's of the retina. And again, you can see he didn't really draw a retina as it looks like under the microscope, because that's what a retina looks like under the microscope. And this is Santiago Ramón y Cajal. So obviously he looked at it and he made conclusions about what he was seeing and what the different neuronal layers were and what the connections are. This is my depiction of the retina, and I've turned it around because I found that easier to explain that way. And I've reduced it even more and I've added color to it. And moreover, I can make this interactive and talk about the vertical flow of information and the horizontal integration that happens through different cell layers by adding that information on one at a time. So I can layer the information as I'm talking and as I'm teaching my students. And then I can tell them sort of where the light comes from and how this entire process works. It's our role as educators to provide context and enable our students to see the connections and to create a world for them that is understandable. We have to synthesize the ideas and give data meaning, interpret it with our students. And really, this kind of storytelling is what we do in all of our scientific publications. We start with an introduction. We go through the material and methods. There's the results section, and then the discussion of those results. And really, when we navigate life, we do the same thing. We recognize patterns. That's what our brains do really well. We're very good at pattern recognition. We're very good at contextualizing and putting things into context. So we should apply those very same principles to our education. Here's Rosalind Franklin, and this is the crystallography that she did of DNA. And of course, she discovered the structure of DNA, and she wasn't sure if it was going to be a two-stranded helix or a three-stranded helix. And unfortunately, she passed away before she could finish the work, but her collaborators, Watson and Crick, picked up her work and were able to do this sketch here. It's a very conceptual sketch, going down to the essence of what it was that Rosalind Franklin was explaining to them that she had seen in the crystallography. And then, of course, they went on and built this model, and nobody would say that that's exactly what DNA looks like. But conceptually, that's exactly what DNA looks like, and it's a really good tool for explaining this discovery. So we're reducing things over and over again to communicate the concept there. Here are some other famous scientific sketches. These are actually three sketches that I would say transformed the world. There's Galileo Galilei's sketch of the solar system, putting the sun into the middle, Darwin's sketch in the middle of the theory of evolution, and then, of course, Watson and Crick's sketches there based on Rosalind Franklin's work. As scientists, we go beyond the simple. And we search for deeper meaning. We search for the patterns to not just describe the chaos, but to understand it. And as teachers, I think we need to also go and deconstruct the complex and provide understanding. We need to separate the signal from the noise. And separating the signal from the noise is really important as we sift through layers and layers of data and isolate the signal. We identify the most salient aspect. We make active choices about what to include and what to exclude, and we synthesize everything into one output, our ideas and our insights that we want to share with our students. We are using a reductionist approach. Now, of course, the question is, how much of a reductionist approach can you do? How far can you take this? How do you find the right balance? So if I show you this is as reductionist as it gets, and I'll just ask you, what do you guys think this is? What does this represent? Nobody knows, right? It could be a circuit board, right? Does it look a little bit like a circuit board? Maybe. I'll give you a little bit of context. It's the same thing, the same data. We're actually looking at the extensors of the forearm, right? So that's another way of looking at it. And this is another way of looking at it, right? So we're looking at the same data over and over again. And all of these are reductionist approaches compared to looking at a cadaveric dissection where you've got a lot more information that you're having to deal with. But even this can be overwhelming, right? There's a lot going on in every single one of these pictures. And that's where we can, again, leverage our technology, and we can add interactivity to this. So now I can go to my learners and say, actually, you know what, those extensors, we can group them, there's going to be layers of them, and so we can go through them step by step, both conceptually with our subway map and in our drawing. And this medical illustration that my students did is also a reductionist approach. They're looking at an idealized form to teach these muscles. So we use this interactivity when we create our online resources, our e-tutorials. And so we've asked ourselves, what works in these e-tutorials? What can we do for our students that will really help them learn well? When we did our first set of e-tutorials, we were pretty happy. We were presenting everything to them. They would open, and there would be these really fantastic animations that would just appear, and the students were like, whoa, what just happened? And then the feedback that we got right away was, we don't want you guys to animate things there. We want to be in control of that. Give us buttons that say start animation. And that was a real revelation, to give control to the students over what happens on the screen. So what works in these e-tutorials? Well, we found that interactivity, focus, reduction, pictures, and quizzes work really well. Those are the things students want there. They go to these e-tutorials to get the essence of the didactic information that they need. So we asked our students, what do you prefer, lectures or e-tutorials? And we asked specifically, what do you think, or what do you find helps you prepare best for exams, lectures or e-tutorials? And I should add that all of our lectures are recorded and posted in the online learning management system, so students can go back to the lectures and go through them at any time. So when we asked them that, show of hands, who here thinks the students responded that lectures were the most valuable resource in preparing them for an exam? And who thinks e-tutorials? Okay, I kind of set you up for that, didn't I? Okay, so here's the lectures, and they strongly disagree that they prepare them well. And here's the e-tutorials, and they really find that those help them prepare for the exams, and they give them that knowledge. And I think what that tells us is not that lectures are bad. I think lectures are really good. I think you can do a lot in lectures that you cannot do in an e-tutorial. But I think we shouldn't be spending our time naming origin and insertion points of every single muscle of the forearm in a lecture, because that's just noise. And if we want our students to learn that, give them control over them, make them click it, make them do a quiz, make them own the material, make them interact with everything. And it's that interaction that is so important. And of course, it wouldn't be a lecture by me if I wasn't going to show you brains. So, of course, I'm going to show you a brain. So I think what we need to do is we need to take the content from sensory to motor. And I tell this to my students all the time: until you can say it, write it, or draw it, you don't know it. Because as long, and we all know that phase where we're in, where we've listened to the information, we kind of understand it, it's really fuzzy, but we wouldn't be able to explain it to anyone. We couldn't actually put it into words yet. And it's putting it into words, turning it into a motor task that is going to be the proof that students have actually understood it, that they own this knowledge. So we go from passive knowledge to the application of knowledge. We go from passive to active. We go from the recipient to the producer. And that is where we really tap into the things that are important for our students, and I think that are important for our society. In essence, what we're doing is, and so in this brain, the sensory areas tend to be further to the back, and the motor areas further to the front. So we have to move our knowledge from the back to the front. And when we do that, and then you see I put two arrows there, one to the frontal lobe and one to the temporal lobe, and that's quite deliberate. And it goes back to the evolution of man. So when we look at the fossil record and we finally reached Homo sapiens sapiens, so we were so smart, we gave us two sapiens in our name, what we see is that that resulted from a massive expansion of our frontal and temporal lobes. And it is these frontal lobes that are so important for our human identity. They are where we have what is called executive function, where we make decisions. It's there that we have our working memory. It's there that we can manipulate information and come up with new things. And in fact, it is in that frontal lobe that the human imagination sits. And it is probably our human imagination, coupled with our use of our upper limb, that has moved humans to the level where we are now, for better or worse. I'm not saying this, it's not without criticism what humankind has achieved on planet Earth. So if this frontal lobe and this propensity for imagination is so profoundly human, well, maybe we should tap into that in the education of our students. William Blake said, "The imagination is not a state, it is human existence itself. It is what makes us who we are." And I think we need to capture our students' imagination in order to engage them and in order to have a meaningful dialogue. But how can we do that? How can we capture our students' imagination? How can we elicit an emotional reaction in them? How can we make them care about what they're seeing? And we know that when students are engaged and they care about what they're hearing, they'll remember it better. All of these elements are important for a transformative educational experience. And a transformative educational experience means you go in one way, and after your educational experience, your outlook onto the world is forever changed. And I think that's what we're trying to do at universities. So how do we do this? I'm going to show you an example here of a video. Now, this is a sneak preview. It's pre-publication, so we'll be publishing this online in a couple of weeks. It's a new video in our series of neuroscience, neuroanatomy videos, and it's very close to my heart. It was the most difficult script I've ever written. It's on pain. So I'm just going to show this to you because in this introduction, we really tried to tap into that emotional component and try to engage the students or the viewers. Pain is meant to wake us up. People try to hide their pain. But they're wrong. Pain is something to carry like a radio. You feel your strength in the experience of pain. It's all in how you carry it. That's what matters. Pain is a feeling. Your feelings are a part of you. Pain. We all understand and have faced pain in our lives. It motivates us and terrifies us. It drives us forward and backward. Pain is an experience that humanity shares across centuries and across cultures. It helps us find common purpose. The collective experience of anguish through history can create a common sense of identity and help us define who we are. But is the experience of pain as universal as it seems? Does one person's injury elicit the same feeling as another's? In short, it doesn't. Each of us experiences pain in our own unique way. Pain and suffering are deeply personal. The physical experience of injury and the way that we bear it are dealt with separately in the brain. And yet, they are linked. Okay, so how do you feel after that? It's still hard to watch for me because I find it just the music, the images, for me, it really elicits an emotion in people. And I think what we wanted to do in this video, and you can watch the rest of it in about 2 weeks on YouTube, is to engage the learner so that they're like, this is so profoundly human, I need to understand how it works, and it is something that every single person deals with and that all of my patients will deal with. I really want to know this now. And then we go in and explain the science of pain as well. But we really wanted to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable, because pain is uncomfortable. So what is it about video that works? So we've done a lot of work with video, and this is old school, a film frame. We don't film on film, we do everything digitally. But when you look at one single frame of film, one tiny little frame, everything is in there. We capture the emotion in one little picture. We go from the complex to the simple. We go from the smallest to the largest. And in fact, this small little frame gets projected onto the largest cinema screens. That's what we can achieve with video. Alfred Hitchcock said there are 3 things you need to make a great film: a great script, and a great script. And nothing could be more true. What you see in our videos is the product of hundreds of hours of sitting together, writing the scripts, agonizing over them, letting them rest for a week or 2 or 5 before you have the courage to go back to them, coming back together as a group and as a team, criticizing each other's words, trying to come up with a better way, sitting there with students who look at you and are like, I still don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Okay, so I need to rewrite this one more time and again and again. It's a very difficult process, and it's not one that we do easily. But I have to say, the exercise of writing scripts, I think, has made me a better educator, because it has really trained me to get rid of all the superfluous, to really focus in on what is essential, to think about what is it that I'm trying to tell my students, what is my message, and how can I engage them best? But it didn't start that way. So this is what I thought I was doing when I wrote my first script, right? I was like, this is going to be great. We have 10 minutes, and I'm going to tell them everything. It's going to be amazing, and I'm going to put all these beautiful things on there, and it's going to be glorious. And the students are going to be, they're going to have in 10 minutes the sum of all knowledge in this topic, and it's great. Well, this is what I was actually doing, and it was not good. But luckily, I was not on my own, and I was working with a really, really fantastic team. So I'm going to show you Zach Rothman. He's our senior producer and creative lead, and he's actually the one who gave me these 2 slides, because he's like, that's what you thought you were doing, this is what you were actually doing. I'm like, okay. And this is Zach in his.
So about 6 weeks before we were supposed to go to camera, we received the scripts, which were essentially 200 to 300 page PowerPoints, unwatchable and unreadable. And, you know, for me, the alarm bells went off.
Yeah, they did. He called us in. He's like, that's not okay. We cannot bring this to video. There's no way. Your audience is going to be asleep after about 30 seconds, and no. So I'm going to show you another clip, and this is with one of my student collaborators, who Parker Hallman. He was really essential for the first series of videos that we did.
It's very different to type something out and think about it and like, oh yeah, that sounds perfect in my head because I've fixed all the problems that might be there. But to hear it out loud as an audience with other people in the room.
And I could see by the middle of the second script being read out loud, I could see the panic in their eyes, and I knew that we had been effective.
Yeah, he'd been very effective. And so we went back and we rewrote everything. And rewrote it again and again until we had a script that would work. And once you have the script in film business, I didn't know this, what happens is the script rules. When it comes to the production day, you do not change any sentences, you do not change any words, you do not change your approach. You might have that discussion like, what if we did that? And then Zach would be like, what does the script say, Claudia? And I'm like, the script says this, we're doing that, okay, fine. And that's really important, because otherwise you start putting on all the junk again, right? You decide on the script, and that's what you go to camera with. So we use a lot of visual for our teaching, and I think we've, as a team, really gotten to a level where we're good at making these videos. But it's not all about the visual approach. There's a lot to be said about the audio as well. And so you saw in that pain clip that I showed you that it's really important to have the right music there and to have the audio to connect with people. And I'm a huge radio fan. I'm a huge radio nerd. I love listening to podcasts. I love just listening to the radio at home. So I really love the audio aspect of learning. And this is Alan Dundes. He was a teacher at UC Berkeley, and he said, light travels faster than sound. This is why some people appear bright until you hear them speak. And I think what he's trying to say is that audio matters. It's not just about the pretty pictures and the content that you can convey in pictures, but it's also about what you have to say with it. And there's actually some research going on about the difference between verbal and visual thought. So this is work by Eleanor Amit and Evelina Fedorenko at Harvard Medical School. And they found that even when people were prompted to use just verbal thinking, people created visual images that accompanied their inner speech. And we all have that. We have that little movie that goes on in our head that accompanies everything that we do. And visual thought, it turns out, is more intuitive for us than verbal thought is. And that probably, again, has to do with human evolution, how our visual system evolved before our larynx was able to form language. Video can bring the abstract to the concrete, can bring you into the here and now. It can bring the far off into the immediate. So it can be a very immersive tool for people. And our brains are wired that way. With video, with images, we get brought into the here and now. We can engage students better. The saliency of what we're showing people is going to be higher when we have video with it, when we have visual cues to go with it. We pay more attention, we care, and we remember better. So how do we design technology to accompany our education and enhance what we're doing here at universities and in the classroom? And that the biggest thing is really that technology needs to serve the pedagogy. And you need to make sure that you choose the media that are right for what you're trying to do. So you have to be really thoughtful about what you're doing. Videos don't work for everything. Lectures don't work for everything. E-tutorials don't work for everything. Podcasts don't. I could go on and on. AR and VR are not the answer to everything. You need to think about what is the advantage of this medium and how can I leverage that advantage for what I'm trying to do. So you have to define your objectives, the milestones that you want your students to reach, the competencies that you want them to have as they come out of your course. And then you look at those and you say, how can I help them reach this milestone? How can I use technology to support their learning? So you then map the technology to the pedagogy and to the goals that you have in the classroom. And most importantly, when you're designing educational material, do it with your students. They will tell you what they need and what they want. And sometimes they might not know, and so you say, well, if we did it like this, how would that work? And they'll be like, no, that's not working. And together, you'll come up with a way that is going to really be supportive for them. So I like to think of it as designing a learning ecosystem, because really you've got so many different things that you want to provide for students. So you've got online materials, you have in-class experiences, you have workplace experiences, and I think all three of those are part of a modern education. And all of them are linked with each other. And you can refer back to the online materials from your workplace experience. You can refer back to the classroom experience. It all ties in together. And then when you've got this network of resources and this network of knowledge, you can really set people up for a lifelong learning process, because they will be used to finding materials in different areas and they will have learned how to navigate this ecosystem. You'll be actually giving them that Google map where they can go in and say, this is where I want to go. How do I best get there? And you saw Google Map will give you 3-4 different ways of getting there. And then you can say, actually, you know what, on my way, I need to stop in this place. So you put an extra stop in there. And that's really what I think we need to help our students with. So what does the future hold, right? Like, the future is bright. We've got we're reaching critical mass with augmented and virtual reality and 360 video. There's been a huge exponential explosion of this technology. I hear Apple is going to be bringing out their augmented reality glasses in 2020. We'll all be wearing them, right? We know, because as soon as Apple puts them on the market, we're all going to buy them. So the other keynote for today is going to talk a lot about what AR and VR means in our educational system. But my question is, how do we integrate the technologies into what we know has been working for centuries? We've been pretty darn good at educating people for hundreds of years. So what do? Do we throw all of that out because we now have a new tool? How do we integrate that into something that works? And will these technologies keep their promise? I don't know. This is from the Indigenous peoples on the west coast of Canada. They have a very, very rich storytelling tradition and a beautiful carving tradition. This is the raven mask, which raven plays a huge role in the mythology. Raven brought the light to the people. So this is a very important part of cultural identity. It's a huge part of storytelling. New technology means we don't necessarily need to carve wood to tell stories. We can just give people a podcast. We can give them a video. They don't need to come together in a longhouse and listen to elders. They can listen to the recording of an elder. Is that useful? I would say no. I think the human experience of coming together and sharing is really, really critically important. This is a piece of art by Sean Hunt, and it's called Transformation. And it's a raven mask, only the raven is a cyborg. And so Sean Hunt collaborated with Microsoft to create this new approach. And so in this work, he took the mask and took very traditional aspects, but it's not hand-carved, it's machine-made. And when you open the raven mask, it's a huge cyborg and it has a HoloLens in it. And so now with the HoloLens integrated into the raven mask, you can get an augmented reality experience of what Raven has to tell you, and it takes it to the next level. This is obviously a one-off piece of art, but I find it is a beautiful showcase of how you can integrate traditional knowledge and culture with new technology. So what does that mean for us? Well, we face a lot of challenges in our education sometimes. We have traditional ways of teaching that, well, haven't been working that well. So here's the challenge I face when I teach neuroanatomy. The brain is a pretty complex structure. It's got a lot of sort of deep nuclei and stuff going on that is really important. And the clinicians that I educate, they need to know where things are so that when there's a stroke in that area, they know what's going to happen. And one of the big things they need to do is take the three-dimensional and turn it into a two-dimensional picture, because it's that two-dimensional slice that they will see in imaging. And I've talked to many students over the years, and this is hands down one of the most challenging things from them, to translate the slice, the two-dimensional, to the three-dimensional and back. And so 10 years ago, this was our idea. We would take MRI scans and we would trace the different areas of the brain and we would reconstruct them. And so we made these 3D reconstructions 10 years ago and we posted them all online, and that seemed to work quite well, only people weren't using them as much as we thought they would. Because I think there's still a distance when it's on the screen. And in fact, the cognitive load, people tell me that the cognitive load of translating a three-dimensional image on a two-dimensional screen back into a three-dimensional image in your head is really high. So it's not working as well as we thought. Enter new technology. So this is the Microsoft HoloLens, and full disclosure, I work together with Microsoft on a project with HoloLens, and they provide funding for my work as well. But I just wanted to kind of tell you what the technology is that I'm using, and that allows us to put a three-dimensional representation of the brain as a holographic object into the room. So now you can have a direct interaction with that. And more than that, you're not on your own anymore. You can collaborate with people, and this is an actual representation of this holographic brain that we have, and you can go around it and teach and talk about what is happening there. And so we're finding, and we've done our first study about this, and we're finding that this three-dimensional object actually helps students perform better in identifying structures on actual brain specimens. And that was our goal. Our goal was to create something that would help them in the real world. And I mean, the research is obviously ongoing. So to close, I just want to talk about the importance of working with these teams. And this is a picture of Twyla Tharp. She's, of course, a preeminent choreographer and dancer. And this is a quote from one of her books. I'm a serial collaborator. And so I just read her book, The Collaborative Habit, and I recommend it to anyone. It's not just an interesting insight into the world of choreography and dance and into Twyla Tharp's life, but it really gives you insight into how important it is to work in teams and how to navigate the nature of different teams and different collaborations. Collaborations are what really pushes us forward. This here is Emily Molnar. She has the Order of Canada. She's the artistic director of Ballet BC. And the ballet world is quite traditional many times. Ballet BC is not traditional because Emily Molnar walked in there, and instead of walking into the dance studio with the dancers in leotards and talking down to them, she invited the company into the boardroom, everybody dressed, sat down equally around a table and said, how do we move this dance company forward? How can we collaborate to create something that hasn't been done before? And that has transformed this dance company. So partnering with the community around you, partnering with your students is critically important when you're engaging in something that's so new. And partnering with students gives them that first really important, very experiential learning experience. They are creating their own learning materials, they're creating learning materials for their peers, and they're learning how to code, they're learning how to write a script, they're learning how to synthesize information, they're learning how to move from the complex to the simple and back to the complex. These are skills that they will use throughout their entire life. And this experiential learning is something that is actually quite old. We think of it as this new thing in education. And I told you I love radio, and this is something I heard on the radio on a podcast. And the podcast was entitled, "The Most Important Book You Have Never Read." And that, it was true. I had never even heard of this book, and I wonder if many people have. So it's Javi ibn Yaksan, or in Latin, Philosophus Autodidacticus, or The Improvement of Human Reason Exhibited in the Life of Hai ibn Yaksan. And so it's about a little boy who is put out onto an island all by himself. It's a story. And he learns everything there is to know about the universe, about the world, about botany and zoology, about the human condition, about astronomy, just through experiential learning, by encountering things, trying to figure things out all by himself. I think the most striking thing about this is, look at the date. This was written in the 12th century. These are very old thoughts, and in fact, it kicked off a discussion in Andalusia whether scholars should be telling people what to think, whether the interpretation of literature, of theology should be passed on from one generation to the next, or if we should give each generation more autonomy to experience things and come up with their own solutions. I don't have an answer to that, but I think we need to keep these questions in mind as we are educating our students. Back to the aspect of collaboration and what works, and maybe back to another radio program that I listened to about the importance of what happened right here in Scotland. You, of course, I don't need to tell you this, the Encyclopedia Britannica was first printed right here in Scotland. Why was it that in the 18th century, Scotland entered into something that was dubbed the Scottish Enlightenment? Well, it had to do with the Scottish educational system, which was superb, and still is superb. Scotland had a 75% literacy rate in the 18th century, which far exceeded that of all other places in Europe. And that literacy rate transcended the class system, so it went to the poorest, it extended to women, which was revolutionary at the time. And importantly, scholarship in Scotland was multidisciplinary by nature. The Royal Society in Edinburgh is multidisciplinary, and it was that multidisciplinarity and that collaboration that pushed knowledge to a whole new level. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that era about collaborating across disciplinary boundaries, across faculties, across universities, to really bring all of these thoughts together and make something new. In my team, I have students from several faculties. When I walk into my lab and I have the art student talking with the engineering student and the health science student, all debating on how to best create this depiction of the head, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing the ideas they come up with just by exchanging their thoughts coming from such different disciplines. This is the sentence that has probably shaped my personal life the most. It goes back, of course, to Immanuel Kant, but I was first shown this sentence in school, where a teacher told me, if you forget everything I've taught you throughout this year, I'm okay with that, but I need you to memorize this sentence and what it means. And I think this is really what we need to tell our students, that they need to dare to know. And it's also important for us. We need to dare to know. We need to dare to go out and create something new. Dare to know. So this is a picture of me with my bees. It's a hobby I took up a couple of years ago. It was completely outside of my comfort zone. But through the collaboration with a neighbor, through good mentorship, engagement, lots of reading, I had my first honey harvest last year. So dare to operate outside of your comfort zone. Dare to experiment, and dare to collaborate. And also dare to fail. Take that risk. And I'm very lucky that my university supports our failures as well, in that they accept that that is part of doing it. Not everything is going to pan out to be wonderful, and that's okay, because you need to be able to take those risks in order to get there. And if we do this, we can come from the effective and go all the way to the transformative, and really change the way that we approach education for our students. So with that, I want to leave you with the long and incomplete list of my collaborators, faculty, students, institutional support from the Emerging Media Lab. I'm really happy to be working with the engineering department. I have 5 of their capstone students in my team. I'm very lucky to receive funding from the university for what I do. Thank you very much.